I'm not going to get dragged down the route of mass deportations or anything like that.
Do you support mass deportations?
Well, if people come illegally, they should not be allowed to stay. Simple as. Simple as. And the only way you're ever going to solve the channel, and boy, have a look at the last 3 days. 500 odd on Friday, 800 on Saturday, nearly 300 yesterday. I mean, the numbers are just exploding. These young men that are coming, and unless they know that, number one, they'll never be granted refugee status by coming via this route, that number two, they're not going to stay, they'll keep coming. It's dead simple. Doesn't matter what you do to the gangs. I mean, you could give it, you could give these gang members life imprisonment, but the more people are going to step in to the gap because of the money involved. I mean, look, think about drugs. However big a sentences we give to drug dealers, there's always somebody else to come and fill that place. But we'll never do this as part of the ECHR. We'll never, ever do this. All the while, the British judiciary can lean on the Human Rights Act, which incorporated the European Convention. We will never, ever deal with it. And I think this is going to become one of the big fault lines in British politics, major fault line in British politics. Starmer, I was there. Starmer, in his second speech to the House of Commons, talked about his belief in the European Court of Human Rights and how we would never leave. We are absolutely clear that this organisation that was set up with the best of intentions 70 years ago is no longer fit for purpose, is through activism, has now moved into areas that it was never intended to do. And the Conservatives, it'll be just like Brexit. There'll be a few voices saying we should consider leaving. If we can't get what we need, we should consider leaving. There'll be the other lot who say, no, we should stay. They'll be all over the place. And it's going to be a very similar debate to Brexit.
But just back to the issue of deportations specifically, do you support that mass deportations? Trump says in America that he wants mass deportations. We're talking about hundreds of thousands of illegal immigrants are in Britain at the moment. Some estimates say the number could even be in, 1 million plus. So do you support deporting all of those people?
It's impossible to do. Literally impossible to do. But do we have to begin the process? Yes. Look, we're told that we can't send people back to Afghanistan, right? That's impossible. Well, Germany, 2 weeks ago, did. Germany sent a plane load of people back to Afghanistan. If the Germans can do it, I'm certainly sure we can.
But if the Americans can do it, for example, in America, they are able to deport a lot of people. I know they haven't under this administration, but Trump was able to. It's not totally impossible, is it? I mean, it should be an ambition at least. Is it your ambition?
The mass deportations in America really happened under Eisenhower, where back in the 50s, he deported over 1 million people who'd come to America illegally. For us, at the moment, it's a political impossibility.
But is it your ambition?
No. I'm not going to get dragged down the route of mass deportations or anything like that. I think it's pretty clear there are a lot of people that have come who should not be given leave to remain. It's a heck of a job. It's a heck of a job. I just think with the backlogs, with all the problems we've got, we've got to go down the Tony Abbott route. We've got, the Australian Prime Minister who stopped this. We've absolutely got to be clear. We won't accept this. We're not going to put people in hotels. We have to start somewhere.
But these people who have come here, some of whom we don't know anything about, one case, terrible case recently, we saw Thomas Roberts, a 21-year-old, young British chap, being stabbed to death by someone who smuggled himself into the country in 2018. These people need to go, don't they? And by saying that you don't support, mass deportations...
If I say I support mass deportations, that's all anybody will talk about for the next 20 years. So it's pointless even going there.
So it's a rhetorical problem.
It's a political impossibility to deport hundreds of thousands of people. We simply can't do it. What I do think is the reason, particularly in France, the reason that Le Pen is going to win the presidency in 27 is the French population are making a link between some of the people coming into France and crime. And we're not even having that debate yet. And the government are actually willfully withholding the figures from us. Willfully withholding the figures. And it was bad under the Conservatives, but it's got worse under Labour. You can't even find out what groups have committed certain types of crime. And it's obvious that whilst loads of great people come to Britain, for the criminal gangs that want to come in, we're easy pickings. So I think, look, this issue of the population, of who's coming legally or illegally, this is going to be what decides British politics at the next general election.
I wanted to ask you this. Has morale picked up among those border agents who for so long have had their hands tied from being able to do their job? Is it a different era now?
Absolutely. I've been on the border many times. The morale is at the highest level I've ever seen it, both in CBP and ICE. Look, and the National Guard and Coast Guard, anybody has anything to do with border security morale, I've never seen morale this high. And I'm excited to be a part of that. And this president is living by the promises he made to let these men and women uphold the oath they took and enforce their laws they took an oath to enforce. So the morale's the highest I've ever seen it. Matter of fact, I've got thousands, literally thousands of retired Border Patrol agents and ICE agents begging to come back. And, we're going to make that happen in the very near future. We need more resources, and we're going to make that happen.
That's a good place to leave it. Tom Homan, as always, Tom, thank you so much for joining us today.
Now let's go to the UK, where Reform, they've gone from recording spectacular poll numbers. There was a poll where they were leading everybody. They were leading the Tories in every national poll at one stage. But now they're in the midst of this damaging internal row between Nigel Farage and Rupert Law. Douglas, can they recover from this? Can they be the dominant Conservative force in the UK? And what is this clash all about? Is it just a matter of egos?
It's actually a little early to say. You're right. Reform has been polling extraordinarily well in recent weeks. And as I see it, there's always, in small parties, new parties, there's always a lot of churn and turmoil. And I actually say in The Spectator this week, it requires quite a microscope sometimes to get under what's actually going on in such internal rows on the right as on the left. But from what I can see, it actually boils down for once to an issue of policy and not of personalities. Nigel Farage seems to have been making a grab for the moderate centre of politics, whilst Rupert Lowe has been going in a different direction. And Rupert Lowe has been going very hard, actually, in Parliament and on social media and so on, about issues like the deportation of illegal migrants in the UK. Now, Nigel Farage has been reacting to these statements of Rupert Lowe's by increasingly, it seems, giving interviews in which he says that it's just not possible to deport all of the illegal migrants who are in the UK, and he's not going to get into that discussion. I think that is a very, very interesting difference. As I say, maybe Farage is simply trying to tack to the political centre, and maybe Rupert Lowe is trying to appeal more to the right. Maybe they're both saying what they just actually think. But it is a very, very interesting disagreement, because to my mind, if you say we have perhaps millions of people in the country illegally, many of whom have been carrying out acts of criminality, all of whom carried out an act of criminality by breaking into the country illegally, then they should be made to leave. It seems to me that's a perfectly reasonable policy. Nigel Farage is clearly terrified of the policy, or of saying that. And so instead he's saying, well, it just can't be done. I think there's not much point of a party of the right, particularly one to the right of the Conservatives, that simply says we're going to sit back and not do anything about the existential threats to our country. So I think it is actually beyond personalities for once. There's a serious rift here on the right. And it's going to be very interesting to see, because either Reform can continue to be a party where people who are opposed to the mainstream narrative of recent decades can put their trust.
Rupert Lowe is absolutely outrageous. Instead of just removing the whip, they've trumped up, as far as I can see, charges. They make it look like he had bullied people in his office, and actually when we scratched below the surface, there was no accusation against Rupert for any bullying. They've made a complaint to the police that he threatened to use physical violence against Yusuf, something apparently that took place in December, but it took them 3 months to make the complaint. They've set out to destroy Rupert Lowe. So this story isn't going away. And the reason Nigel refused to have any questions in the press conference is because this is not a Westminster bubble problem. This is a problem of very substantial proportions for reform, and he didn't want to have to answer questions on it in the press conference. But Rupert Lowe ain't going anywhere. I'm not going anywhere. Nigel Farage, frankly, having crossed that Rubicon, trying to destroy Rupert Lowe, is in a position where we are now going to challenge him.
Can I just ask you, Ben? We've got about a minute left, minute and a half. Sure. We alluded to this earlier. Now, Rupert Lowe stands for mass deportations, which we all know will be very difficult. We understand from polling that something like 60% of the country are quite keen on mass deportations, and 99% of Reform UK voters are keen on mass deportations. How is Nigel Farage going to get away with saying we're not going to do that?
Well, he's not going to get away with it. He's not going to get away with it because it absolutely makes no sense. After all the discussions we've just had this evening, how can anyone in their how could any sane-minded individual say that people who enter this country illegally should not be detained and deported? But one of the biggest problems this country faces is an absence of borders and the economic, cultural and criminality that exposes us to. The problems that we face are so significantly down to the fact we don't have borders. And yet Nigel, Reform UK, the party that stands apparently for the sovereignty of this country, there can be no sovereignty without borders, is getting up and saying he's not in favour of the mass deportation of illegal migrants.